then giving up the microphone and re-enabling it.
Muting at the bottom on the right, yes.
Yeah, seems to work. Thank you.
Oh, here comes Greg.
Good evening, Greg.
He looks like he's short of audio at the moment.
He might just be dealing with permissions.
Yeah.
Hello.
Good evening, Greg.
Realistically, I suspect this is everybody we will get, so we can start anytime, I would say. Take it away, James.
Cool. So, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. This is the JSON path, September 2022 interim. Because this is an official IETF meeting, the usual disclaimer of sorry, I'm having a real. I've not had my second coffee yet. Note well. So all the usual rules and stipulations of the IETF apply to this meeting as they do to all other IETF meetings. Please note well. Note takers, I'm terribly sorry that I haven't got around to note taking the last meeting. Glenn, thank you for sending the action points over immediately after. Unfortunately, I was unwell for quite a big chunk. Blue sheets are automatic. We don't have to worry about that. I'll keep an eye out on the chat in case anybody else shows up or we need to do it through that. In terms of the agenda, I see we've put a few things on the list. Is there anything else that we want to cover?
I would. We should just visit the IREGX draft at some point, maybe first, to get that out of the way.
Okay.
And could we move 258 to the top of that update on issues list? I think it makes more sense to do that first.
Sure. Sure. So do you want to start with IREGX, Tim?
Sure. So that one's, I think, been ready for working group last call for a while. You haven't had the cycles to document shepherd it yet. Sorry to hear about.
Sorry about that.
Sorry to hear about you not being well. I hope you're recovered.
Yeah, I'm mostly recovered now.
Okay. You know, if it's going to be an issue for you, I would propose that I remove myself as co-editor on that one, because after all, Karsten did most of the work, and I could shepherd that one, because I think we should get that going forward.
Yeah. In terms of my availability, it is something that I should be able to do in the next couple of weeks.
Okay.
Now that I'm mostly back to normal, so I just need to put the time in my calendar and sit down and do it. So I think that if I haven't done it in the next couple of weeks, then that might be the best course of action to get things going along.
Yeah, Tim, I think you are underestimating the amount of contribution you made there. So I would be happy with keeping you as a co-author.
Well, I share much more. Go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to add in that JSON schema would possibly have a passing interest in this regex standard as well. something normative to reference would be fantastic.
Yeah, I mean,
Great.
I care a lot more about getting it moving forward than whose name is on it. And so,
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
But let's shoot for James doing this.
Yeah, give me a couple of weeks, and if I'm not able to do it, then I'll put it to the list, and we can figure out an alternative arrangement.
Okay, fair enough. So, update on issues. Does one of our editors want to take the lead on setting the stage and getting us going here?
I sent a summary on 258 round by email. I don't know if people have had a chance to read that. Don't you can bring that up, James?
Sorry, what was that, Glenn?
Can you bring up the email I sent yesterday about with the
Sure.
overview? It's a bit of an ask, I know.
Is that the one called Update to Syntax Breakdown?
Yeah, here's my overview at the bottom of there.
Sorry, where?
The email from me down towards the bottom of that screen. Here's my overview.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean that's kind of summarizes it, but just to talk through it, I mean the major improvement that issue 201 and PR 258 bring to the table from our perspective is it straightens out the syntax, makes it much easier to do an implementation with a similar syntax input to a parser generator, for example. And that's all in place in the PR. And really the rest is about the way the semantics are described. Clearly we want to keep the semantics the same overall, but there are different options for describing the semantics, and we've looked at some of those. And I've got something on the agenda to discuss that again. And also the naming and the document structure. So Greg moved the star pickers section into its own section before selectors. So the current PR is in that structure. I don't find it quite as readable as the current spec currently, but that's my personal position. So you know, Greg and I are both looking to other people to review it to see what what other perspectives are. And I've requested some changes to actually finalize the terms, because I think the wheels might come off when we finalize the terms. We'll see.
Okay, I put my hand up and let me say a couple of things. Speaking, I buy, and so early on it seemed clear to me that nobody wanted to change the semantics of JSONPath, and this was primarily an editorial discussion, a large one, a complicated one, but primarily editorial, and so I decided to stand back. So yesterday I read the draft. Thank you for whoever it was that formatted a copy so that I could do that. Thank you. And I hadn't read a draft for at least 2 months. So, it's been a while, so it wasn't fresh in my mind at all. And for what it's worth, I found the current structure of the draft acceptably readable and clear and comprehensible, and it made sense to me. So, so speaking with relatively fresh eyes, I think that what you have there now is acceptably comprehensible. I don't really have an opinion as to whether it was better or worse than what it was before, because I can't remember that. But it's essentially okay. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say. So assuming that the rough structure represents the consensus of the editors, then we should be able to proceed to attack some of these detailed issues that people have brought forward, that Lynn in particular has brought forward.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, I would like to say thank you very much for the incredible work, Greg and Glenn. Also, I do like the new concept of the two selectors, and it took some time for me to get used to that new structure, but Carsten introduced the new 3 terms, which brings a lot more structure into it. I see this as some kind of atomizing the former big selector thing. Selector thing, yes. I think it's very important to get the terms right. Maybe we discuss it now in short. I read the spec also yesterday, and I like the structure. I think it's a very good start. Okay.
I'd just like to say that the structure was the important thing to me. As far as naming, I'm going to leave that to everybody else. I really have no opinion on what things are named, so long as the structure of the things are somewhat sensible. To me, the way this is structured in the draft that I put together makes more sense than the current document, because it is as Stefan said, it's atomized. It's really isolating the breakdown of what's actually operating and doing what, in my mind, at least. But as far as what things are named, I don't really care. You could call them the starters, appenders, and pickers if you want, which is the placeholder terms that that I think Carsten put together. So, yeah, I'll leave naming of stuff to other people.
Go ahead, Carsten.
Yeah, so I sent this short note this morning at 2 a.m. I think that there's one thing we should do before doing further editorial work, which is agree that we allow the wildcard picker in all places. Pickers are allowed, which would simplify the structure somewhat, because we don't need to have special selectors for those pickers. I would try to really separate the concepts of starter and appender. This means that a query is clearly defined as a single starter followed by a sequence of 0 or more appenders. Then we should quickly deal with the shortcut appenders, which are just syntactic sugar on the 2 bracketed appenders, the child and the descendant appender. And we shouldn't even try to use a common name for starters and appenders, because they are really different things. They share a right-hand side interface, an outgoing interface, which is the node list, which we come to next. But this frees up the term selector, and we might actually want to use the term selector for what's called picker in my preliminary terminology. The one thing that we really need to decide is to allow the wildcard picker. Of course, this is a technical change in contrast to the other things, but I think it's a technical change. The need for which has become clear by the better structure we now have. And this technical change enables editorial fixes, so I think it's a reasonable thing to do this first. Yeah, and then I think we need to spend some time on the issue of sequencing in the node list, which has these weird determinism constraints on it. I think we have a pretty good grasp for those, but we haven't really written them up yet in a way that I would understand them. Yeah, this really is about describing interfaces between the components that leave node lists and the components that pick up node lists or a single node and deliver node lists, and how these node lists are integrated for components that pick up a node list and return a node list. So that's number 3, and that is entirely a technical issue, but I think one where we mostly have consensus and just have to make sure we find the right words to describe the consensus.
Greg?
Carsten, I think you answered this in your little speech. But do you have a preference on the order of PRs for the integrating the wildcard and then doing this editorial change? I'd prefer them not be part of the same thing, part of the same PR. I would prefer them to be separate.
Yeah, PRs are less important for our process than they maybe in the process that you're used to. So I wouldn't mind mixing this stuff up. It's a little bit of busy work to do a technical only PR that enables the wildcard picker in those places that will be enabled once we simplify the current draft. So my preference would be to do it in one PR.
Okay.
But this can have a good description which says it has one technical point and a number of editorial points.
Yeah, it's simple enough for me to take what I have currently and just take the two. I guess it's a Descendant wildcard and the wildcard selector, and then move those. I guess combine them into a single picker, and put that up in the picker section. So I mean, it's trivial for me to do that. I just like the idea of the current document in this PR just being an editorial thing. Would you consider this still an editorial, or is this a technical change?
Well, enabling things that wasn't enabled before is a technical change.
Right. So this would enable having a wildcard and a single index in the same bracketed syntax.
Yes.
Okay, so that would be a
Let's do-
technical change.
Glenn, you're trying to get in?
Well, firstly, I support the wildcard item number 1. I think we should do that. I'd be very happy to do that after merging the PR if that's more convenient, because I think we can all see what the change is and that it's very straightforward. Secondly, I think the terminology that's been proposed is good, the starter and appender, and I think possibly we could go for Selector as the name for star picker. I think that works, but it will need a kind of editorial pass over the whole document after that to make sure that we're not misusing the term selector subsequently. And I think the sequencing is okay, but there's an issue that we'll come to later, which throws the balls up in the air slightly. But I'm sure we can sort that out and fold it in later. So, essentially, once we've got the terminology straight, I'll be happy to merge the PR.
Just speaking as a recent reader of the draft, I found the terminology in current use nice and clean, and I'd worry a little bit about having selector mean two different things. So my initial instinct would be to just stay with picker unless somebody has a better thing, a better alternative rather than overload the terminology. But once again, this is an editorial issue, and I think it's somewhat up to you folks to figure it out.
Well, Selector wouldn't be overloaded. The way that I would do this, and I would prefer to do this in this PR, I would define starter and then change over everywhere Selector appears to appender so that Selector doesn't appear in the document anymore. I'd commit that, and then I would also have a secondary commit of changing picker to Selector, just to make things clear.
That's good.
Okay, I can work on that.
So it sounds like our editors have consensus on. So it doesn't. It sounds like nobody has any issues with Karsten's, or with the notion of adding the wildcard, and we editors are roughly pointing in the same direction about how to get there.
No, I think it's a logical thing to add the wildcard to the list of the pickers. It's logical. It makes sense. I don't have a problem. I applaud them.
Okay, then let's go back to Karsten's email here on the screen. James, could you increase the font size a bit? Thank you. Okay, and scroll down a bit, okay, so we can see. Right, so does this lead us naturally to Glenn's issue about determinism then? Or Glenn, do we need to do anything else first?
I think we could next discuss my issue on picker semantics.
And that issue is
261. Because now that we're going in the direction of these of pickers, and we've got some decent terminology, I think we still have actually three options, it turns out, for how to describe the semantics of pickers. And I'd just like us to spend 5 minutes on this call looking at the options so that we're sure we're going in the right direction. I think it's acceptable the way it is, which is option 1 here, where the picker is essentially a selector because it's given a value and it selects 0 or more children of that value and returns them in a node list. So, but I see that as being quite a implementation-oriented approach. You could imagine such a thing being coded in the implementation. Another option, which Greg and I discussed early on, which Greg didn't like and I favoured, was that the picker should be really a predicate, and that it determines whether any given child of the value is to be selected. Then the selector would say, all the children selected by the picker are, for all the children which are for which the picker is true, appear in the node list in the order blah blah blah. So that would be more of a, in my terms, a less implementation biased kind of approach, and it's actually got a narrower interface because the pickers then don't get to choose the order of the node list, and they can't see the parent of the children. So it's a much tighter description. The third option, which we moved away from fairly early on, but I think we need to just revisit. So we've got the broad set of options, is to not actually give pickers semantics on their own, but only to give pickers semantics in the context of a selector. So essentially to say each picker behaves like this when it's in a child selector, and then to infer the semantics of a child selector from that, much as we do with today's list selector in the current draft. And the benefit there is that we don't then get into implementation at all, or we don't separate out picker as an implementation item. It's purely syntactic. So, we've probably got different opinions on this, but I just wanted to float those three options and say that I prefer either of the other two. I don't really favor the current one, but I could live with it, but I don't really like it.
Okay, if I would like to comment on Glenn's options, I first would come to the terms. I'm not very happy with the term picker. From my point of view, picker is a misleading term, as picking is an explicit action. But a number, one or string, foo, are merely passive labels of an array element or an object member. Those are only indicating to the items in question rather than actively picking, which is selecting. And this is, from my point of view, the discrepancy between those terms. Can you exchange them? Picking, the picker and selector. And this is the current discussion. We change the meaning, and we already have the term index in the spec. Index is a non-negative integer that identifies a specific element in an array. Note that the term indexing is also used for accessing elements using negative integers and for accessing member values in an object using their member name. This is read from our spec. So we already relaxed the meaning of index. And so why not think further and relax this term more? Picker is a new term, a single item within a bracketed child selector that matches the values which are to be selected. So the most implementers, users, if they meet the brackets, would think about an index, array index, or if it's a string, it's a name if they come from member name if they come from JavaScript.
Karsten?
I did one thing. I would like to come to to Glenn's options. I did one thing. I changed picker to selector. So I start with the second object, which reads now. An index is a predicate which determines a given child of a value. A child selector selects those children of its input value for which an index is a match. I changed the wording somewhat. The first option, a selector presents a single value to an index. The index selects 0 or more children of a value, and the resultant node list is used in constructing the selector's node list. This simply makes no sense. A selector does not present a single value to an index, and an index is not cannot select something. So from my point of view, those stuff going into the brackets is not nothing active. these are not selectors, they are only indicators. They are indicating to members or array elements. And the selecting must be done from the outer, from the selector, or maybe from the appenders. Appenders, I like selectors more, and would merely, if we want to name the brackets or the dots, I would introduce the term accessor for it. So that's my point of view after thinking some time about this wording. Okay, thank you.
Karsten?
Yeah, I think what Stefan just said is really the prime demonstration why you should not mix up discussion of terms with discussion of the technical concepts behind that, because in the end we have to get the technical concepts right, and we will find terms for those. So let's stick with the working terms for now, and so I'll talk about appenders and pickers. And to Glyn, the fact that a description technique is also directly implementable does not make it less desirable as a description technique. So I think that the little hang up you have with the fact that the description technique is not unimplementable is not a reason to not use the description technique.
Yeah, my concern there was it's biased towards one particular implementation.
No, it's not biased. It's just using a description technique that should be familiar to any mathematician, and that also happens to be implementable, but that's not a bias.
Yeah, but I think a naive implementation of the spec would tend to make a picker a subcomponent with that description.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So
I mean, we can add some verbiage that says that this is really all just description technique, and that there are better ways to implement this. But I think that doesn't have to stop us using a really useful, really highly understandable description technique just because it also could be used by an implementation.
yeah, I accept that, but the point I'm making is that I think the other options actually give a better description.
Yeah, and that's where I'm disagreeing. So first of all, if the semantics of a picker depends on the appender it is used in, then we have failed isolating the two terms. So the interface between an appender and a picker should be independent of which appender we are talking about. This doesn't. Pardon me?
In option 2, they are independent.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the way it should be. And we should not make the description more complicated by putting in stuff from the appender into the picker again. These should nicely abstract away from each other.
But,
and
I don't understand that your description of the preferred structure seemed to be favoring option 1. But
Glenn, you may have mistakenly, I think, swapped your option numbers in this post.
Oh.
I think option 2 was the way that I have it currently, and option 1 was your predicate.
Oh, dear.
Well, forget option 1 and 2. The question is the picker or the appender doing the taking apart of the node and presenting the children?
Yes.
And the answer in my option, whatever its number is that an appender presents one node for the child appender and a tree of nodes for the descendants appender, which are not the child and not the descendants, which is why the term is a little bit confusing. But again, we are going to get to terms later. and then it's the job of the picker to actually take that node apart. And there are several good reasons, and the main reason to do it this way is that the appender cannot do the enumeration because it doesn't know what index or member name information is of interest to the picker. So the picker has to have a look at the whole thing and not just the child, because the picker needs the index or the member name to decide which of the child nodes to include.
Okay,
So
yeah, can I just interrupt because I possibly didn't explain option 2 well enough. So option 2, the picker would be given the value of the child and its array index or member name.
yeah, this is seriously weird to me because you have a component that is doing some taking apart that is really unneeded. I mean, if I want to get item number 5, there's really no point looking at items number 0 and 4 and 6 to
Well,
9.
yeah, not in implementation terms, I agree. But in spec terms, it's just a for all.
Well,
Yeah, Greg's been on the queue for a while. Greg, if you have a
okay, so I'd like to address something that Carson touched on a little bit. Glenn, your argument that the way that I'm explaining, right, your option 1 here, as it shows in this issue, which is the current explanation, the current descriptive language in the spec is option 1 here. The way that you're objecting to this as being a potential implementation path, I don't think that's a valid argument because your option 2 is also a possible implementation path. I could also argue that a naive implementation could have an appender take apart its children and give each child to the picker, and
Okay.
the picker says yes or no, and that would be an implementation. So I don't know that that's a valid argument. Secondly, Carson kind of touched on this as well. If I have an array of 1,000 items with just an index picker of 3, then I want the 4th item. I don't need the appender to present all 1,000 items to the index picker of 3 in order to just get the 4th item. If the appender instead presents the parent to the index picker says, "Oh, there's the 4th item. I'll give that back."
Yeah, I agree that's true, but it's an efficiency concern.
I would argue that developers tend to think more in terms of efficiency.
Yeah, but you see, you're kind of supporting my view that whichever option we go with, readers of this or implementers are going to be thinking of it in terms of implementation, that we can't win,
Yes.
really. Yeah.
Whichever way we go, they are going to be thinking of implementation. So my bet would be to have the descriptive language be the more efficient of the two. If a naive implementation wants to follow the spec and do that, then at least they would get something that performs okay-ish.
So since this is the point I wanted to address, I'll butt in. So I disagree strongly. I think that the most important thing about the language in the spec is that it be clear about the semantics, the result to be achieved. If the best way to achieve that clarity is to describe an inefficient implementation, I'm totally okay with that. What my original reason for putting up my hand was to echo what Carson said a couple of cycles ago, which is it's perfectly okay to use an iterative pseudocode-ish description of how it's done to establish semantics. That's not radical or new. However, I think if you do that, it's absolutely necessary to have language saying that this algorithm is provided only for explanatory clarity, and there is no requirement whatsoever that it actually be used, which means it's perfectly okay to do that as long as you give that language. Sorry, that's all. Karsten?
Don't we have that for the slice implementation?
Yeah.
Or for the slice description, we have some pseudocode somewhere that says this is how this is supposed to work, but implement it differently.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Karsten?
So the difference between the two approaches is essentially where in the abstract definition we run the enumerator. And
Correct.
running the enumerator in the appender means that we have to supply everything the enumerator finds to the picker. So the picker interface is not a node list based interface, but it's an interface that associates the nodes with attributes such as array index and member name. So that makes things slightly more complicated for me because I no longer can think in terms of node lists, but I have to think in terms of these attributed things.
Well, the input would be the attributed thing. The output would be essentially a Boolean in option 2, rather than a node list. The node list would purely be a concern for the appender.
Yes.
You see, part of my thinking here is that because I think it's correct to introduce pickers before the appenders rather. I think option 2 enables us to present it more in abstract because it's just a set of predicates that apply to children, children with their index or object name, and that can be described in isolation.
What about negative steps? Do we have a problem there?
Oh, okay. Yeah, right. Yeah, and array length. So it's another attribute.
Or you can just give the picker the parent node, or I guess
That's what I meant.
the parent node, and it selects which ones that you want.
Yeah. I admit that the number of parameters is shorter in option 1.
Are we going to end up with possibly extensibility issues if we go with your option 2 here? For instance, Carson just mentioned the negative index issue, which added another parameter. Are we going to later find, oh, there's another thing that requires another parameter? We have to add that now.
I don't think that's an issue because these are just spec words. They don't actually require an implementation or suggest an implementation to anything in particular.
I get that, but I mean, the spec words still have to go and be updated. And now you're tracking 3 or 4 things instead of tracking one thing. I think that the mental burden is easier with option 1.
Yeah, I do agree.
The information that a picker can operate on is essentially bounded by how we describe the interface. And if we forget to put something into that interface, that would easily have been available from just providing the parent node, then we have made our life way more difficult.
Okay, I'm coming around to option 1 on this basis. So, yeah, any other views? Okay, then I'll remove this kind of concern then, and we'll go with the current approach.
Okay. So
Thanks for guiding us around to that discussion, Glenn.
Yeah, I just thought it was worth having it so we've all got that in our minds at one point in time.
That's fair enough. Thank you.
So my view, but my current mental image of option 1 means that a descendants appender presents the current node as well as all structured descendant nodes to the picker individually. So the picker doesn't get to operate on the relationship between the descendant nodes. So that would essentially be very, very simple by saying the child selector just presents the parent and the descendant selector just presents the parent, and each each structured descendant node to the picker, but the picker does not know whether it's being used in a child selector or descendant selector.
That's correct.
Yeah, that's true. But I think the way the spec is currently structured and the way the PR is structured means that the descendant selectors are actually defined in terms of the child selector. So essentially, we enumerate a list of descendants, and then we run the child selector against each one. So it's a kind of, it doesn't really matter, you know, because we end up with the semantics of the child selector really driving things.
Yeah, I'm not sure that there is so much being shared between the child and the descendant selector, but yeah.
Let's see how that
the same interface, and we will describe the interface in the child selector because that's the first one we describe. So yeah, I agree.
I think we're all pointing in the same direction now?
Yeah.
I believe so.
Okay, so let's move along to with Glenn's list.
Sorry, just before we move on, Stefan is frowning, and he had points about this index notion. So I just want to check he's comfortable with the option 1.
I now recognize that that you exchanged the numbers in your email and in the what I preferred when reading your email was number 2 is now no I must read it once again. Yes, I prefer number 2. I prefer number 2 in here in your comment, which is shown here. Yes, definitely. Definitely number 2. It's very unusual for me to see a picker as an actively acting element or a function or an algorithm which selects parts of a node list or a node list, except the filter picker. The filter picker, in fact, has artificial intelligence built in. A plain index, a plain member name is not able to do picking by itself. That's where I fail to agree here. It's hard. I think we are complicating things a lot. Not by the by the atomizing these elements of the former selector, but by that discussion of how do the picker and the selector interact, and it's hard for me, and I think also for potential implementers in future to get that right. My opinion.
I would agree with the idea that it's a passive, like a member name on its own is passive, but I wouldn't necessarily apply that passivity to all of the pickers. For instance, the filter picker is actually a delegate. It is actually iterating through all the children and identifying which ones are selected.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, may I make a suggestion that we go with option 1 as described here and see how it comes out? Because I think based on the discussion, it will actually come out okay. And I think it might actually satisfy Stefan when we get the final text.
Yeah, this is at the end of the day an editorial discussion, and the best way to move an editorial discussion along is to edit, to actually produce a subsequent draft and see how concretely we feel about it.
Yeah, I mean, if it's any comfort, Stefan, I share those concerns, and as I'm doing the editing, I will be sensitive to those concerns. So I'm trying to make the description as clear as possible.
Yeah, at some point we will need to have this terminology discussion, and maybe picker really was a pretty bad term to use here, but yeah, that's why I chose it, so we can make sure that we change it before casting it in concrete.
Definitely having a bad option in order to force change is a good strategy. Do we have enough time to talk about determinism?
Oh yeah, this is a 2-hour meeting. I got lots of time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I raised this issue kind of separately from the current discussion, the PR discussion, because I noticed that our current draft was overly deterministic, such that it would even exclude some existing implementations. So I thought we needed to loosen it up a bit, add more non-determinism.
So you say that at the start of the ticket, you say that it cannot produce a specific result. I'm not sure I know why you think we should be able to produce this specific result. Can you scroll way to the top?
Yeah.
Yeah, this one.
Yeah. Well, we've actually got that example there in the spec, and we can't produce that example result.
Yeah, so let's remove it from the spec.
But that example result is precisely what is produced, or rather, it's along the lines of the consensus of the implementations. And we seem to be removing that consensus for no particular good reason.
So this is a breadth first implementation, and you're saying these should be allowed by our non-determinism.
Yeah.
Karsten, are you is your argument the breadth first versus depth first difference, or is it the non-determinism of object members?
No, there is no problem with object members here. It's just that it's just that this is a breadth first result, and I just wanted to make sure that this is what we want. I don't have a specific opinion here, but allowing breadth first is a little bit unintuitive to me, but we can certainly opt that we want to do that.
Yeah, and just to be clear, we're not precluding depth first, we're just allowing breadth first.
And you're saying that the breadth first is the consensus of implementations?
Yes.
Well, I think that settles the argument. We have to allow it then.
I would like to say that my my implementation is not among the consensus.
I think possibly mine isn't either, but you know. Okay, that was one item, the descendant ordering, just to loosen it up a bit. Then the next one was the list selector ordering. So can we scroll down a little bit? Right, so yeah, and this does go along the lines of the iteration order for objects. You see, it's possible to assume that the iteration order is not spec'd by JSON, but nevertheless to assume that it's predictable for any given implementation. But that's not the case because, for example, in Golang, the iteration order can change from one iteration to the next. So I wanted to allow for that, and that example shows a possibility, you know, that the iteration order could be for that list selector in current terms, two pickers, if you like, could produce different orderings, could iterate the object in different orders.
Sounds good to me.
Yep. Yeah, you know, the one thing I think I tossed a comment on here is that the reason why this is the case is not mysterious at all, and it falls directly out of the definition of JSON, which is clear that, you know, order cannot be expected to be maintained when accessing objects, members of an object. So that falls out straightforwardly. But I think it's important also to emphasize that applying a JSON path does not reorder array elements. So you know, whenever you say, you know, do not count on ordering an object, it's probably important to make sure we always emphasize that yes, array order is significant. Yeah.
Yeah. And so let's look at descendant selector ordering now. If you go down, James, please. Yeah. Just have to reread this to remind myself. Yeah, it's essentially the same issue that as you traverse a node, a value, then the order in which you encounter the children can vary from one picker to the next.
Karsten, your hand is up. You want to?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I just agree with what Lynn has been saying about the descendant selector ordering.
And then lastly, repeated runs. So if you have quite a straightforward JSON path and value, which can produce either order, we maybe should even say that a given implementation could produce different orders on repeated runs, just to make it absolutely clear that we're not assuming that implementations are deterministic.
I think that's worth doing.
I think that was it.
But you now have examples that can be produced. Would be really useful to have examples that cannot be produced.
Yeah. So some array related ones can deliver that.
Yeah, and the combinations of arrays, descendants, and maps. I think that's getting pretty interesting when you actually run more complicated examples.
Yeah, and with multiple pickers in a descendant node list, and it gets quite juicy.
Well, I think in the end, this is to a large extent about what the descendants appender does to the various node lists it gets from the various pickers it talks to. So for the child appender, the comma in the appender gives an ordering, gives a partial ordering. For the descendants selector, we just said we are allowing breadth first, so that is going to be interesting. And when the results of the various pickers are being put together, which part of the ordering is maintained and which part is not. So can you, given that well, if you have a contains 1, 2, comma, B contains 3, 4 situation, can you have something like A1, B3, 2, 4 order and so on? I think we need to create some examples for that and make sure that the merging step we have in mind for the descendant selector does the right thing. Yeah,
I agree. I think in terms of a plan, I think we should not broach this until the current PR is merged.
Yep.
We should do it after the fact, because we don't want to just drag out the current PR with all this complexity.
Yes.
Yep.
Another aspect of this is going to be the test suite, or however we manage testing of this. Listing out every possible permutation of acceptable orderings is probably not ideal. So we would want a better way to do that. But I'm not sure what that is in particular. But we definitely need to nail this down in order to implement some sort of test suite.
Okay.
I must confess that I need to read that issue again much more carefully. I cannot imagine a situation where a single application will present with repeated runs different orders of node lists, but maybe I have to read it again more carefully.
It's definitely weird, but it does happen, especially as Glenn posted in here in Golang, the present in JSON objects, the presentation of the various members can be is non-deterministic in their sequencing. For whatever reason.
Many programming languages have a a content addressable array, mechanism. We do call it a map or a hash map or whatever, and I believe it is occasionally the case that there is some randomness, and many languages which provide this facility are clear that they do not guarantee the ordering, and there may be actual randomness in the generation of hash sizes, hash table sizes, and hash chaining into parameters such that yes, this is actually observed in the wild.
Okay, this surprises me that in practice with repeated runs you have that non-determinism, but I'm just learning.
Well, the main reason why you want this is that hash tables have anomalies when you sort all items into one bin, or the majority of the items into one bin. And you don't want to put an attacker in a situation that it can predict which bins are things put in. So you add some randomness to your hash function. And some implementations add that randomness per run of the language, and one added per iterator. And if you do it per iterator, then it becomes interesting.
Just as a anecdotal side note, I keep track of the system text JSON namespace issues and PRs in .NET, and there actually been a couple issues raised recently where people are complaining that objects were not serializing in the same property order between runs.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think the conclusion of this is that we need to make sure we have a rich set of examples that shows the range of things that can happen when you combine multi-level expressions. Okay, what's next?
I need to move into the house. I'll be right back.
I think we've also agreed we're going to land the big PR before we do this one, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we've covered all three of these points, haven't we?
Yes.
Do we want to cover any of the other issues that are notable and outstanding, or?
Well, I think I went through the issues yesterday, and it's not obvious that any of them are still really, as you said, notable and outstanding. Maybe we should just take a second and glance at the issues list.
Yeah, sure.
Well, we kind of decided 255.
Yep.
Okay. There we go.
Okay, so taking the silence to mean that our issues are reasonably well covered.
What about 252? Sorry.
Which one?
252.
Yeah, my perception was that we agreed that the descendant selector actually includes self, like just the child selector includes only self. So from an XPath point of view, it should be called self selector and self or descendants selector.
Yeah.
But that's a terminology thing again, and I think that the editors will throw various terminologies at each other for a while before we settle on something.
Okay.
But I think it's implementation consensus that dot does include the current node as a source of children to look at.
Yeah. Where are we on extension points? Is that still in process? Oh,
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Just waiting for the spec to settle down.
Exactly.
Yeah. Good. And how about 195?
Yeah, I seem to be in the rough here. So most people seem to think that we should stick with singular paths for all of filter expressions. I'm a little bit unhappy that some use cases may be excluded by that, but maybe it's not that important.
Yeah, I didn't detect that that consensus personally, and I was kind of going along with the drift of the issue, the initial proposal to include the non-singular paths, but we can always add it later in the spec process.
Yeah, so the issue would simply stay open until we have settled the current issues.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, it's a little bit of a bug thing. Of course, it's better to have a simpler spec and only allow singular paths at all. But it's also weird to have an existence expression that cannot be applied in places where you might have multiple matches. So that's just my general consideration here. Maybe we should have another look at the implementation consensus to find out whether we even have data that would support this decision.
And my personal thoughts on this is that I think it's fine for the exists expression, but not within filter expressions, for example. I think having, but then at the same time having like a wild card in an exist expression, but not being able to support that in a filter expression feels weird.
Well, exist expressions only occur in filter expressions.
Do you mean comparisons?
Yeah, as comparisons. That's. Thank you, Glenn. Being able to have them in exist expressions but not comparisons feels strange. But maybe it's not. I don't know.
Well, for a comparison, you want to have a single value, so having a singular path is kind of logical. For an existence expression,
yeah,
you
it's
often
nice to say, does this object have any children?
Yes.
If we allow multiple results within a comparison, we would introduce the in operator through the backdoor, I think.
Yeah, we don't want to do that.
Okay.
Okay, let's leave this open then.
So can somebody type a note to the issue summarizing what we just said?
Yeah, I'll do that.
Yeah. Okay, I hope today will mean something when we look at this in 5 days.
It's the dated comment.
Yeah, it says something like 3 days ago and 8 days ago and so on.
Oh yeah, okay. So
And if you hover over it, it'll put the absolute timestamp on it.
Yeah, sure. Just
okay, chat.
thank you.
If we don't have any more issues that we want to cut through, shall we agree on roughly when we should have a follow-up interim meeting?
Yes, but I'd like to remark that we're a little further out from being finished than I thought we were. I'm a little disappointed. I thought we were closer than we are. So IETF 115 is in November, and at the moment it seems to me unlikely we're going to be able to do a well, we can do it that we'll be able to do anything really significant in time for that. So I'm disappointed. So when should we look to have another talk?
The internet draft deadline is on the 24th. If I get this correctly, 1 second.
It has been very noisy here at the moment. Can you repeat the proposal?
Well, there isn't a proposal right now, but the internet draft deadline is on October 24th. So we have about 4 weeks to get our act together. If we want to make that deadline, then we would still have 2 weeks for a working group last call before the IETF. So this is kind of the most optimistic thing. Can we fix the remaining issues in 4 weeks?
If we have some cycles available, I think we would be able to. If the editors have some cycles available.
Also remember, Carsten, we need to get iRegex through first because JSON path depends on it.
Right, but fair enough.
Yeah,
So
We can
I think
let's call them at the same time.
So if the editors have some resources to put into it, I think that we could probably get through this in 4 weeks, and I would love to do that.
okay, we're kind of serialized on the Greg finishing the PR, so it somewhat depends on his cycles too.
Yeah, I should be able to have that up in the next few days pretty easily. Are we wanting me to go ahead and add the wildcard in this PR?
I believe so, yes.
Yes, please. It's mostly deleting text.
Okay.
So
I'll do that as a final commit.
Great. So would we want to have an interim in week 42?
so week starting the 17th of October.
Yes.
Hockey starts that week. I don't know.
What starts that week?
Hockey, the NHL. It spins up in the middle of October. I might be occupied.
Yeah, but at the time it starts, we're already done with it.
I watched them delayed.
Okay, so let's do a doodle poll for that week.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll sort that out after the call.
Great. Have a plan.
Easy.
Are we done for tonight then? Anything else? I don't hear anything else.
So thank you all.
Okay.
We have had a few vacations getting in the way recently, but these are getting fewer now. Fortunately, we don't have people breaking their ribs like in the other working group I'm working with. So please don't break your ribs.
And happy camping stuff.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Talk to you later.
Thank you. Bye.